Hello again, everyone. It's MrMostDaysOff, and I'm back again for another episode of the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This week, we went a little out of order because of the way that The Simpsons originally aired. So we are doing Season 1, Episode 11 and 13, The Crepes of Wrath and Some Enchanted Evening. But before we dive into these episodes, as usual, I'm not alone on this journey. Let me introduce you to your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How are you today, Rich?
I am here, and I have been watching The Simpsons, as usual. So, not as excited about these episodes as usual, as some of the normal ones, but that's okay. You can't like them all, and you can't hate them all. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. I'll go ahead and throw it back to you, the man, the myth, the Manic Mailman, if you remember that character at all. It is Miles.
So yeah, you kind of said it already, man. These two episodes were a little bit of a letdown considering the gems that we've been going through the last few weeks. We'll go ahead and announce next week the WizKid and I are going to be bringing to you in order how we're going to rank this season 1 in order of how much we like them. And it's going to be a pain in the ass. This is going to be a labor of love, but I think it'll be worth it for us to compare how close our lists are. I'm going to guess that at least for the terms of humor, these episodes might not make it towards the top of the list. But let's go ahead and dive right into the Crepes of Wrath. What do you think?
Let's get this show on the road.
So the chalkboard gag and the Crepes of Wrath is garlic gum is not funny. Couch gag is Homer just pops out of the couch. The couch gags really haven't taken off yet, but I'm looking forward to season 2. I think that's when they actually start getting kind of their own little style to them.
I actually thought there was a while at the earlier stages of the show where there was a lull for a while where they actually started repeating, and I don't know if that happens in season 2, but for some reason, just from my childhood, I thought there was a time where it repeats for a little while, and I know they've already repeated a couple times in this season, but I'm cautious about the couch gags for the second season.
Maybe I should be. I just always love the couch gags, and sometimes they get so zany, especially like my absolute favorite episodes of The Simpsons are the Treehouse of Horror episodes. And like when they get the crazy stuff with that, I absolutely love it. Maybe I remember just a couple of them being great, and for whatever reason I have them in my mind as better than they were. But I used to look forward to them. I don't know what that says about me as a person. I do know that this episode does introduce another new character, Agnes Skinner, Principal Skinner's mother. And right off the bat on this episode, she's pretty early, but this episode opens with Bart getting home from school and the house being an absolute mess. His room, it seems that the source of the mess is coming directly from his room. He runs upstairs to feed his pet frog, and Homer ends up coming home and getting furious that the house is a mess, and on his way to Bart's room, I believe, he trips on Bart's skateboard and falls down the stairs where he hurts his back. There's a pretty funny sequence where like the dog comes up and Homer asks for help and he just comes down and goes to sleep, and then Maggie, and then the cat. And by the time Marge gets home with Lisa to help out Homer, he and all of the Simpson animals and babies are just kind of lying around napping on the floor because Homer can't move. Marge becomes furious and tells Bart to clean up his room, and while cleaning, he comes upon a cherry bomb that he somehow forgot he had.
Cherry bomb!
Were you as into fireworks as I was when you were a kid? Because I fucking loved blowing shit up. I wasn't a vandal. Like, I blew up shit that, like, I had myself, like my army men, and, like, which I'm not like Sid, I swear. I'm not like the Toy Store villain. It wasn't like demented shit, but like I'd take like firecrackers and stuff them inside a shoebox, or like after Halloween was over, stuff them inside a pumpkin and shit like that.
I was more of a model rocket guy where I would attach toys to model rockets, which for the record is a terrible idea. It completely distorts the balance of weight, and the rocket ends up going sideways and coming at you. And when you're in a cast around your ankle, it's kind of hard to get out of the way.
Well, plus, like, the property damage, I can imagine, because I used to write those things off in, like, my neighborhood, and, like, you know, they'd come down, but, like, I'm thinking if it turns sideways and goes through somebody's
It went
window,
into someone's backyard, and my friend would not climb the fence, so me with a cast around my ankle had to climb the fence to go get the rocket back. But that's all right. There were a couple G.I. Joes in my day that did get smoke bombed, where you would turn them all black from putting the smoke bomb on top of them.
Well, nowadays you'd end up on a terrorist watch list if you did that shit. But regardless, my point was to say I don't think I've ever forgotten about a cherry bomb. Cherry bombs are like the quintessential like choice in blowing shit up when you're a kid, and the fact that Bart forgot he had one was actually the most outlandish thing to me.
His room was a mess, dude. He didn't know anything that's in there.
He would know where that cherry bomb is.
No, it's Bart Simpson, dude. It's Bart Simpson. Plus, if he would have remembered it, then he wouldn't have had it for this episode, which is kind of the whole driving factor around this episode. But when he was cleaning up his room, one of the things that bothered me, and I don't know why it bothered me, because I had like 3 or 4 baseball bats at the same time in my day, but it bothered me that he was throwing stuff in his closet, and there was clearly a baseball bat in the closet, but he had another baseball bat that looked the exact same that he picked up and threw in the closet. And I guess just from a 90s cartoon standpoint, it really bothered me that he had 2 bats. I don't know why.
I don't know. I played Little League when I was a kid, and I had a couple of different bats. I think having a couple bats is acceptable. I don't remember. Maybe I'm tripping. Regardless, we get to school the next day, and Bart, along with his cherry bomb, shows up with the other boys, and it just so happens that Principal Skinner is showing his mother, Agnes, around the school. And something pretty interesting about this character, and it's actually addressed in the DVD commentary of this episode, Agnes Skinner is a lovely person in this episode.
I actually wrote that down.
She's so nice and kind.
I wrote that down.
Yeah, she's just very sweet and nothing like the crotchety old bitch we get to meet in the later episodes.
So what you're saying is Bart's direct action in this episode is what causes Agnes Skinner to become the shrew that she becomes.
That's actually how they address it in the DVD commentary of The Simpsons, is they basically justify this character switch by saying that the cherry bomb incident was the last straw that just drove her into being a cranky old lady.
But it didn't keep her from misremembering who her son actually is.
True. That comes later.
So obviously we kind of jumped the gun slightly on this, but Bart causes a catastrophe in the guys' and the girls' bathrooms, and Agnes Skinner happens to be sitting on a toilet when everything comes out of that toilet right up her bumhole.
Right up the butt. Absolutely.
What in the butt? Nasty schoolyard, or nasty little girl toilet up the butt is what this is about.
So about this time, Homer is at the house because he can't move because he threw out his back, and Marge is going pretty crazy because Homer is running her around, plus she has the normal frustrations of being a housewife in the 90s. And then, to make matters worse, Principal Skinner comes a-knocking at the door, and you know as well as I do, if you're a kid in elementary school, or if you're in elementary school, and the principal comes knocking at your door, rarely is this a joyous moment in your life.
You done fucked up.
You done fucked up indeed. Absolutely. So Principal Skinner comes in, and there's a moment here that made me laugh quite a bit where Homer said, "I would get up, but the boys crippled me." And in a very just flat and stern voice, Principal Skinner says, "I understand completely." That made me laugh. I got the impression that he's been emotionally crippled by Bart maybe more than once in his life.
Well, and not as much as like over the years the character Principal Skinner will open up a lot more and become a more, I don't want to say likable character because you actually pity him a lot more in later seasons.
Pity is more, yeah.
He hasn't even been emotionally turmoiled enough yet.
No, I mean, I think there's been a couple of occasions, like with Bart the Genius, when they spray paint him on the wall, and don't they call it, like, "I am a wiener" or something like that?
Yeah, but it's misspelled, so you can't really get mad at that.
I'm a whiner? Yeah, it was something of that nature, for sure.
Whiner.
But yeah, they decide that deportation in the form of foreign exchange program is the best bet to take care of Bart. Homer and Principal Skinner are way into the idea. Marge is a bit hesitant just due to the fact that she's a loving mother, and with just a little bit of conversation, Bart seems way on board with it.
I actually really like the part where Skinner first introduces the idea, and he's talking about deportation, and Marge is like, and Homer goes, "Hold on, let's hear him out." I love that part.
That was a great Homer line. Oh, and another thing that was of interest is because the finances we've talked about on this show before of how much do the Simpsons make, but it was brought up that this would be no charge to them as long as they were willing to take in an exchange student themselves.
But see, that's the other note I forgot to mention when I was talking about Bart having 2 bats, was that the Simpsons are barely scraping by and this kid has 2 bats. I'm sorry to go back to that, but I forgot to mention that in my little tirade earlier.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, bats are fucking more expensive than you would think they would be. I remember that as a kid.
Like when you have more than one bat, because I think I had 3 in my youth. They are all different colors and varieties. And this being a 90s cartoon show, they were like the exact same color, and that would never happen with a child.
Well, and no 10-year-old uses a wooden bat, man. That's the other we all use aluminum bats.
Well, now.
So they end up there. Bart is going to be going to some fancy chateau in France where they make wine, in wine country, I think it was listed. And the Simpsons would not be getting a French child. No, they would be getting an Albanian child. I don't remember if they explained why that was, but that's the setup for this program, folks. That's what's going on today.
That's like what is Springfield Elementary involved in, where Skinner sets up a foreign exchange student that clearly is trying to get American secrets, nuclear power secrets. What is Skinner involved in? We'll get into this at the end.
Well, especially with his military
background.
Yeah. That's going to be some deep-rooted conspiracy stuff. What is Principal Skinner's true motivation here? Moving on into this episode, Bart arrives in France after being dropped off at the airport. Homer at one point tells him not to mess up France the way he messed up his room, which made me laugh quite a bit. Bart arrives in France and is immediately excited because he's picked up on a motorcycle with a little sidecar, and they're driving through like hill country, and they travel through some French paintings at some point just to kind of set the scene. And when Bart is holding up the bottle of the vineyard that they're supposedly traveling to, and of course when he pulls the bottle down, the building doesn't quite look exactly like it was pictured. It's kind of a shithole, and we quickly realize that these two are not going to be giving Bart the French experience that he had dreamed up, but they are actually going to be using him as more or less slave labor to make their shitty wine.
Child labor at its finest, my friend. And Bart learns an important lesson here, which is nothing ever works out the way that you expect it to. Don't get your hopes up.
Low expectations are the best way to have a great time.
I was gonna have a Homer quote in my mind from future seasons, and I can't even remember it right now. Along the lines of trying is the first step towards failure, which is a Homer quote that I love. But there was another one, but we'll go with that one for now. Trying is the first step towards failure.
That's so fucking Homer. I love that shit.
I actually used that in a speech project in 9th grade where we had to do like a famous quote, and I actually drew a picture of Homer saying that. Never mind, I'm getting ahead of myself.
It's all good, man. So we start to see that as Bart's time gets shittier and shittier, where basically the mule is treated better than he is, Adil, who is the Albanian boy, at first seemingly is just the best thing that could have ever happened to the Simpsons. There is one point where they're eating dinner and Marge starts to take the dishes away, and Adil gets up and says, "Oh no, Mrs. Simpson, you've been oppressed enough for one day. I'll take care of this." That cracked me up.
I love when he's introduced to the students at the school, and Skinner makes a quip about him being a backwards neighbor, and oh my gosh.
From a backwards country.
And I don't know if you're getting ahead past the dinner scene or if you're just using that as an example, but I actually really like the conversation that Adil and Lisa have, and it's not really a conversation. He's basically shit-talking America, and Lisa is standing up for America, but I feel like that conversation would not go the same way with today's Lisa, basically. I think it's written down here where Lisa actually says, "I'm defending a country where people can think and act and worship any way they want." And Adil says, "Cannot," and she says, "Can too," and he says, "Cannot." And, man, I mean, again, The Simpsons nailed it freaking
Simpsons
27 years, and it's still an issue today where can we actually worship and act and be the way that we want to be? I think that's a very good topic.
Super quick side rant because of my, fucking recent travels. I bought a bottle of fucking hot sauce, of Mexican-made hot sauce, in the airport at the duty-free shop where it was supposedly sealed for me, which it was sealed for me, and just in some little contraption that they have, so that I could take it on the airplane. When I get back to Houston, where we had a layover, we had to go through TSA shit again, and they pulled my fucking hot sauce out and said that I could not take it because it wasn't sealed properly. And I shit you fucking not, this pissed me off, but what really pissed me off is as soon as you get past security, there's this little fucking bullshit like welcome to Texas stand, and they were selling Texas hot sauce in the same fucking bottle right on the other side of security. So fuck you, TSA, fuck you a lot.
You know, I had an issue once a few years ago when I was traveling, I think, to Colorado to visit relatives, and I'm diabetic.
Because your pancreas is a pussy.
It produces absolutely no insulin whatsoever. But I have a little Avengers lunchbox that I take with me everywhere. I have my insulin with it. I have loads and loads of snacks. It's what I take to work with me every night. But when I was going through a TSA checkpoint heading to Colorado, I was told that I would not be able to take my pineapple juice cans with me on the plane. Now, they're very, very small. They're nothing where you can hide anything in them. But they told me we have to check to make sure this is actual pineapple juice. And what they told me to bring next time to the airport was a resealable container to put the pineapple juice in. So I said, you're telling me to take it out of this can that clearly says pineapple juice with a snapback lid and everything, but you're telling me to open it up and pour a clear substance into a container and that it's not going to look conspicuous, but they told me that it would be easier to test that way. Now, did they actually open my can of pineapple juice and test it even? No, they let me get right on the plane with it and just tell me that's what I should do next time.
So fuck you, TSA. Moving on. It very quickly becomes apparent that Adil is not the sweet, innocent child he was made out to be, but is in fact a spy of some sort for his homeland country. He ends up more or less kissing up to Homer so that he'll take him to visit the nuclear power plant where he's taking lots and lots of pictures.
The way Homer does. I'm sorry, it makes me crack up.
Nuclear.
No, it is nuclear. It's not nuclear. The way you remember is whenever Homer says nuclear, it's pronounced nuclear. He's doing it completely wrong.
Yo, man, it is what it is. Nuke you, fuck you, whatever.
That's the American way.
So he takes these pictures, sends them back. He is the Sparrow, I believe is what he was known as. Around the same time that he is more or less getting involved with terrorists, we see back to Bart where he discovers that these winemakers have been putting antifreeze into their wine. They test it on him, which is super fucked up actually, and then send him, when it doesn't kill him or make him blind, they send him into town to buy more antifreeze. Bart happens to come across a policeman, and he is frustrated because he cannot communicate his situation, but then after a few minutes he realizes that he's been listening to French for the last 2 months and can actually now speak it, so he's able to report the crime to the policeman and everything is saved on that end. Meanwhile, Homer the buffoon is looking out his window at the trouble in the neighborhood as the essentially what would today be Homeland Security. At that time I think it was just the FBI. But they are coming down on the Sparrow, and Homer is like calling out for Adil in the treehouse, like, "Hey, you don't want to miss this. Come on down here." And Adil, of course, is who they are after, which is funny because in another episode we're gonna have some interaction with the authorities and Homer doing something kind of buffoonish.
Homer's buffoonery saved America,
and that pretty much put everything right. Bart comes home. They send him back to Albania. They actually traded him out for an American spy child, which was a pretty funny moment. Then we get a little bit of a touching scene at the airport where Bart comes back from France, and he actually took the time to go shopping for his family. He brought something back for all of them, and then they go home, and the episode ends with them all basically as a family back home.
And Bart says, so basically I met one nice French person.
that was they kind of do like a recap where Bart brings it back as, so basically I'm saying I met one nice French person, which was a great recap to the entire story. Overall, this is an episode that I actually remember fondly.
Yeah.
But really, it's a good story, but it really isn't that funny. Like, there wasn't a lot going on, and I was interested to read that this was actually originally going to air as the season finale, which to some extent makes sense to me because it kind of builds up to a lot of the antics that Bart had this entire season, just have finally gone through the roof. He gets sent away, but it all ends with the family being reunited.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense where you'd want to end the season on this one, but I'm really happy that, well, I'm not happy with the episode they ended the season on, but I'm really happy with the next episode, which we won't talk about till next week.
Yeah, definitely. Next week we're going to be doing Krusty Gets Busted as a solo show, and then we're going to talk about our overall thoughts on first season in general. Then we will get back to the 2-episode formula coming back the week after with season 2. And it won't be too long till we're at my favorite episodes, the Treehouse of Horror episodes. But that's all for the future, folks. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up the Crepes of Wrath. Richie, was there anything from your book that we missed out on?
Well, before I get to the book, there was 2 quick things I wanted to mention about this episode. One quote that we didn't get to say that I think's really, really funny is when they're eating dinner with a deal, and he does get up to go take the dishes away. Homer makes a quip relating to Bart where he says, "It's pretty clear which cylinder wasn't firing." But that one got me to laugh a lot. And then when Homer is taking a deal through the Springfield nuclear power plant and he's taking pictures, they're in radiation suits, and Homer takes off his radiation helmet when they're around all this terribly dangerous and radioactive material. But in all the pictures, Homer does not have his radiation helmet on. And I don't know why that bothered me so much, and I guess that's part of the joke, but I was just like, you're supposed to know this. You've been working there for a few years already. Like, oh my God, please put your helmet back on. But
I thought part of the joke there was that Homer would have been unidentifiable if he kept his helmet on, but as soon as he takes his mask off, he's posing in all these like terrorist pictures that he's now going to be attached to during like the investigations and whatnot. I thought that was actually part of the gig.
It was all intertwined. Homer, the pro-terrorist radioactive buffoon. But that was just me personally. The thing that made me laugh was that the guide I go off of here, The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family, actually mentions that above Homer and Marge's bed, they have a picture of a deal.
Oh, God.
So, yeah.
Poor Bart.
Yeah, he's fine. Homer said he loved him, kinda.
Yeah, that was a roundabout way, and I really like that part in Marge's letter. At one point, she writes to Bart, updating Bart on all the family, and she mentions that the night before Homer fell asleep talking about how much he loves you, which was technically true, but was very manipulatively and creatively spun by Marge to make Bart feel better in a funny, loving way.
She basically, for those who haven't watched the episode and just listen to the podcast, she basically made Homer say that he loved Bart, and yeah, I guess so. Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, it was a reluctant agreement more than like him gushing about it for sure.
But yeah, that wraps it up for me on this episode.
Awesome, right on. So moving on, our next episode is Some Enchanted Evening, which aired on May 13th, 1990, but was actually supposed to air far, far earlier as the season premiere of this entire series. And there's a lot that you can kind of tell because just the short strides this family has made in the early season, it's kind of a weird half step back with some of the way that the characters are drawn, and then also their voices just seem a little bit off to me in places, but I think that's due to the fact that we've been watching episodes where they've now had, several weeks of interacting with one another and getting to know their characters. But there's some pretty interesting story on why this episode was delayed in the first place. So, first of all, at the time, The Simpsons were closely working with Klasky Supo Productions in LA, which a lot of you may possibly remember, or at least it may ring a bell. Klasky Supo are the same studios that brought us the Rugrats for you Nickelodeon kids.
I mean, I can just see the picture on the Rugrats popping up too when you say that.
Yeah, it would always come up at the very end of every episode, Klasky Supo, and it was made of like weird shit. But Yeah, this is the studio we're talking about, but what they actually did was they worked for the early Simpsons shorts on the Tracy Ullman show, and they were still trying to work with each other on the actual show when it came to be. But the very first episode, they apparently send out their like background drawings to Korea, and like a lot of their drawings and like the animation goes to Korea, and only part of it is actually done in LA. I'm not really 100% sure.
Are you talking about the Klasky Supo stuff or?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Okay.
So the Simpsons in general I'm sorry, the Simpsons episodes are what was sent to Korea. And the first episode came back, Some Enchanted Evening, and like James L. Brooks was pissed because he said it was not good. And it actually got to the point where James L. Brooks and Gabor Supo got into a yelling match with each other where James L. Brooks was telling him that the animation was shit, and Supo was yelling back that it was more of a writing issue. The animation was fine, which is fucking laughable if you think about
and
it.
Good for James L. Brooks for standing up for that. Like, it's easy to say today because James L. Brooks is such a huge, important factor in the Simpsons lore. But
this was 1990.
This is literally the first episode. So for him to already be standing by his creation like that is it says a lot about his character. And obviously, you can tell when you see this episode. You're exactly right. It looks like a step back. Technically, it was the first episode they made, but between the Tracy Ullman show and the way the animation is by the end of the season, I even remember as a child seeing this episode and feeling like it was a little misplaced animation-wise.
It felt weird. It's actually a pretty cool episode, but it felt a little bit off and weird in places.
Yeah.
But so that's actually some interesting folklore, and I'll admit I only have one internet source that I found through IMDb, and I was reluctant to believe it, but it sounds passable to me. The second episode, Bart the Genius, the producers were basically to the point where they felt if they had as much trouble with Bart the Genius when it came back from animation in Korea, they were just going to pull the plug on the entire show because they just thought it would not be worth all the trouble. Fortunately for all of us Simpsons fans, Bart the Genius came back with only minor issues that were easily fixed in post. And we then got God knows how many other hundreds of episodes of The Simpsons now that the show is continuing to be pumped out to this day. But there was so much turmoil over this episode that it almost led to production being pulled, according to the internet lore.
Those damn Koreans.
It did not specify if it was north or south. You'll also notice there's no Santa's Little Helper in this episode because, once again, this episode was created before Santa's Little Helper actually exists due to the production being out of order. It does open with the chalkboard gag, I will not yell fire in a crowded classroom, a play on the concept of yelling fire in a theater, I do believe.
Oh, look at that. It's already coming back around. That's an inside joke just between the two of us. Fuck everybody else.
So the couch gag is they just all squeeze in and nothing happens. Again, these are pretty lackluster. And then we get right into the Simpsons household where, again, a little bit rough animation. They're having breakfast. Things are a mess. Everybody is kind of running Marge ragged, which is a common theme of this show. And they all scatter off to school and work respectively, disrespecting the lunches that Marge made for them and basically taking her for granted in general.
A quick little tidbit about the all the background noise going on is you can hear the broadcast of Bill Pie in the Sky. Everyone knows Bill Pie in the Sky makes no sense because the character clearly is Arnie Pie in the Sky, which he will actually go into years down the road. And it still, to me, sounded like the same voice. Either way, Bill Pie in the Sky sounds exactly like Arnie Pie in the Sky to me. So I thought that was cool because in earlier episodes there was a TV news anchor that was not Kent Brockman, which later, that character will also be introduced.
Yeah, they're already kind of in the world, but they just haven't really been ironed out yet, and it's kind of cool to see this early iterations of them, of what we know what they're going to become.
I don't buy that. I think there was a turnover at the Springfield Television Broadcasting Company, and they just needed a whole new cast to come in and revamp the entire broadcasting company.
You could very well be right. So we get to the point where the kids are at school and Homer's at work and Marge is listening to the radio while she's cleaning the mess of the house, and she decides to call in to Dr. Marvin Monroe's more or less self-help. He's kind of doing like the whole Dr. Drew. No, that's the sex one. Dr. Phil. He's doing the whole Dr. Phil stick where, basically offering some armchair
Don't you
fucking
mean Dr.
psychology.
Phil does the whole Marvin Monroe shtick?
Yeah, it's true. Simpsons did it first, didn't they?
Simpsons
You're
did it.
Totally right. Simpsons did it. So Marge calls in and starts complaining about Homer and how he doesn't show her any romance and takes her for granted. And Homer is listening at work and telling the guys to turn this up because he loves listening to about these poor bums or slums or whatever.
Which is
he
funny
says.
because there's not one recognizable face at the power plant that's working around Homer. Not one person that you can really recognize. It goes back to this being like you're hinting at the first episode, so there's no other real cast of characters.
Exactly. It's really, again, it's very bizarre just in watching it in order. It's a fine episode. It just feels out of place, and that's very much so because
Exactly.
it is. So Marge basically gets the advice that she should demand that Homer respects her and romances her, and she's not his mother, she's his wife, damn it, and she should confront him as soon as he walks through the door. Homer had realized, or really his co-workers had realized for him, that this was his wife talking about him, and he goes to the bar after work trying to figure out what the hell he should do. And there's a point where Moe suggests that he should take her on a nice romantic weekend, and Homer basically is like, oh, no, that'll never work, which I thought was pretty funny, just, his lack of willing to even try things and convinced that it's, just going to fix itself.
I thought it was weird that Moe actually gave Homer really good advice. Like, that's the whole staple of going to a bar is the barkeep is supposed to help. You're supposed to tell them your troubles and they help you realize what you're supposed to do. But Moe's never been really good at that. He'll say things that are true, but he'll say them in different ways. But in this episode, Moe clearly gives Homer perfect advice, and maybe it's because it's dealing with Marge, and as we all know, Moe will have a thing for Marge for a very long time.
That's true. That's all fucking very interesting. I like to think it's just that when he was younger, he was less cynical because he's got black hair in this episode, and as he grays out, I think that's the situation. But yeah, so Homer does in fact come home with flowers, or I'm sorry, a flower, because he couldn't afford a whole dozen, and a box of chocolates.
Roses are fucking expensive, man.
Dude, roses are fucking expensive. I'm lucky that my wife doesn't like roses. She likes like wildflowers and stuff like that, and those are fucking cheap by comparison, frankly.
That's just what she tells you to make you feel good about yourself.
That's fine by me. Works as long as she's happy and I'm happy. It doesn't really matter. But roses suck, dude. Legitimately, they don't even smell good. Is like the thing. Like they're all right. There are better flowers out there.
They're just a symbol.
Exactly. That's really what it is. It's the symbol. Also, they're fucking only really expensive like around Valentine's Day, and the rest of the time they're reasonable. But like it's ridiculous that they like quadruple in price around Valentine's Day just because that's what you're supposed to buy. But let's save that for a Valentine's Day episode, which we'll get to.
There will be plenty.
Oh yes, I choose you, Richie.
Aw, thanks, Ralph. And there's a picture of a train on it.
Aw. So, Homer and Marge do decide that they're going to go on a romantic evening with one another. Before they can go, though, they have to acquire a babysitter, so they call the agency. The agency instantly recognizes that they will not watch The Simpsons. They have the Simpsons children's pictures up on the wall with big no. So they're forced to call back as the Sampsons, which somehow the thinly veiled disguise works.
Oh, I love where Homer's talking to the person in charge there. And the person in charge says, "Didn't you just call back a second ago?" And he said, "No, I said we're the Sampsons, not Simpson." And it's funny because if he really was the Sampsons, he'd have no idea about the name Simpson.
See, I actually like the part right after that where he's like, "But for what it's worth, we happen to be neighbors with the Simpsons, and we find that they are a fine but misunderstood family," or something of that nature. That was really funny. He had to say it through gritting teeth.
It's a good metaphor of the Simpsons in general. They're a fine family, just a little under the nose.
Before we get to the adult Simpsons weekend away and the children's Simpsons issue with the babysitter, there's actually one of our favorite parts of the show, and we got a double dose. Not just one, we got 2 prank phone calls to Moe's Tavern in this episode, which I think is interesting because, again, since this was supposed to be the first episode, I feel like they were trying to solidify that this was going to be a running gag throughout the series.
I completely agree with that. I think that's exactly why they did it. But another interesting tidbit I wanted to touch on before we get into the next part is when Homer actually comes home with the rose. his car is not in the driveway when Homer is walking to the front door. So I'm wondering, was Homer being a responsible drunk? His car's not in the driveway. Did he walk? Did he get a taxi? Where's his car at? Maybe the Simpsons or the writers didn't want to have to acknowledge the fact that Homer was clearly at a bar drinking and then came home hours later, and the car's not in the driveway. So I figure maybe they didn't want to have to deal with that kind of backlash.
I think there's plenty of times, though, in the season or series where Homer's clearly been to the bar and drives, or it's implied that he drives. I would guess, personally, that this is more of a factor of, like, some of the mini animation issues they had with the Koreans. Maybe at the point that they got it back, they were like, fuck, you were supposed to have a car in this scene, but oh well, fuck it.
I was just wondering, maybe the censors wouldn't let them show that. Like, maybe they had to walk a fine line before the show's actually established.
So that's interesting that you bring up the censors, because I was going to get there. We'll get back to the prank phone calls, because I want to go down this road for a minute later, and we're going to jump a little out of order. But when the Simpsons do get on their night away, at one point Homer and Marge are in the hotel room, and it seems pretty obvious that they are going to get down with some adult alone time, if you know what I'm saying. And Marge says she's going to go put on something more comfortable, and Homer says, are you going to wear the blue thing with the things, or something of that nature? The censors actually had a really, really big problem with this, but your boy, James L. Brooks, once again, I don't know how he did it, but early on, even with The Simpsons, he had a special agreement where basically he more or less didn't have to listen to the censors on these issues. This came about earlier in the season when we saw whenever Grandpa Simpson actually referred to the family jewels in a letter that he wrote angrily towards the censors. This was something where James L. Brooks just had the contract written out so that the censors more or less didn't really have control over them.
Huh.
Pretty interesting stuff.
That's awesome. Well, and especially later in a later scene when Marge wants to go home to check on the kids when they're not answering the phone, where Homer makes a little quip where he says, the deed's already been done. Or no, that's not what he said. He said, why not? My work here is done, which is a clear implication.
I think he just said, I suppose my work here is done, because I also wrote that down as one of my favorite quotes.
A clear implication that Homer already did the nasty with Marge, so he's okay going home.
Alright, so this is all sort of scatterbrain. I know we're going on tangents here on this one, but that's just the type of episodes these were. Going back to our prank phone calls, we got two of them. We got a prank call for Mr. Alcoholic, and we got a prank call for Oliver, Mr. Oliver Closeoff, which made me chuckle. Before they ever got into The Simpsons getting away, we had to hire a babysitter. And who we got from the agency was Mrs. Botts. Mrs. Botts came in, and she seemed a little interesting. She came in with a couple of bags and refused help for them. She was instructed to put Maggie to sleep immediately, but was told that Bart and Lisa could stay up for an additional hour and watch the Happy Time Elves, some sort of like Barney-esque type show knockoff for children. Bart tried to argue and get to watch something else. They refused, so they watched this show until Bart notices the babysitter is busy, and he turns it on to what is essentially America's Most Wanted. I think it was called Armed and Dangerous.
That sounds right.
Meanwhile, the babysitter, we start to notice, is starting to prowl through the house, taking various objects and complaining that it's mostly just kid stuff and junk. So she's very clearly robbing the Simpsons, and not too long after this, we see Bart and Lisa.
Good old Lisa.
We see Bart and Lisa see the story on Armed and Dangerous of the babysitter bandit, who was Miss Bukowski or something like that, who may be using a clever nickname or alias such as Bots, which that part made me laugh. When
wink, wink.
Bots, yeah.
Lisa's the one, the clever Simpson, I guess.
Which actually, at that point, Lisa and Bart both get tied up by Mrs. Bots because she finds out that they know her secret. And Maggie, the smartest Simpson, I think we both believe, possibly a Muggle-born witch, once again.
She's just the most adept Simpson, clearly.
Fair enough. But yeah, she definitely is. And this episode comes and once again saves the day because she unties Bart and Lisa, and they manage to trick her into...
With a magic spell, I assume.
Yeah, probably. I'm embarrassed that I don't remember what the correct spell is to untie knots. I'm gonna have to go whip myself.
To make Maggie jump up and grab the... Isn't that Leviosa that makes her jump up and grab the...
Leviosa just levitates things, but we can get into how Harry Potter nerdy I am later.
Apparently not that much.
Yeah, apparently I'm out of touch. I have been away from Hogwarts for a few years now, so, you know, you lose these things if you don't practice them. Anyway, the kids have managed to overcome Mrs. Botts. Fortunately, one of Bart's baseball bats was handy.
Yep.
One of his many that we know, or at least two that we know he has. They managed to tie her up and call the authorities. They're excited that they might get armed and dangerous t-shirts as long as she's convicted. But in the interim, Marge and Homer have called the hotel room, or have called their house from the hotel room, and were concerned that since there was no answer, they should go home and check. Homer goes home and sees that the babysitter has been tied up, hog-tied essentially in front of the TV, playing the Happy Time Elves, and he assumes that the boy has just done something terrible to her and immediately unties her and then helps her to her car and pays her triple while carrying out all the stuff that she stole from their house for him. So... absolute dunce of the show. And once again, I believe the town had him written down as local boob, and that absolutely makes sense.
Which won't be the first or last time they call him that.
No, definitely not.
Something I thought was funny when they were watching the Armed and Dangerous show before they recognized their babysitter was they were previously the time they cut into the episode that they're watching. They were talking about somebody who was the cue ball killer. And also the title, I like to tie all the episodes together, so I'll try to draw thin lines where I can. The title of the Happy Little Elves is The Happy Little Elves Meet the Curious Bear Cub. So I thought this was cool that Maggie's favorite tape is essentially about elves meeting bear cubs, which we know from previous episodes. If this was actually the first episode of The Simpsons, Maggie had no issues with bears in a later episode in The Call of the Wild, and maybe it's because of the Happy Little Elves, so that could have essentially made Maggie more of a badass when it came to the bears that she encounters.
I hope that was intentional, because that's fucking great. I honestly doubt it was, but it seems pretty dope.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And something else that you just mentioned, that one of the bats that Bart used, Bart indeed used that bat, and it's only one of two that he has. He literally hits the babysitter with the bat and drops it on the ground. And then, in the previous episode, he's cleaning up his room. Did he leave it on the ground for, 13 episodes before he actually cleaned it up? Because that's kind of what a kid does.
Yeah, it absolutely could be. Though bats, to be fair, were always something you didn't want to leave lying on the floor because you were just as prone to, slipping and falling on them as anyone. I'd always, kick that shit to the corner. Usually, prop it up or
but
something.
you just said kick it into the corner, which means it was still laying down on the ground, just in the corner.
True, totally. So, anything else from you or your book that you would like to talk about for Some Enchanted Evening?
There are actually a lot of notes that my complete guide to The Simpsons had on this one. The one that stood out to me was that they counted how many times Maggie fell over in this episode. 19 times.
I saw that on IMDb as well. It's that's a lot.
Yeah.
If you consider the show at this point is actually 23 minutes minus however long the credits are, you're damn close to once a minute.
There was one time where I noticed, because I actually read that note before I watched the episode, there was one time where she fell down and didn't even get up all the way and fell down again. So it wouldn't be hard, I think, to get 19 in if that's the kind of rate that you're doing it at. Something I noticed in this episode personally was the music that Homer and Marge were dancing to sounded like the music playing in the background during the episode of the Happy Little Elves, just with the live band playing it as the Happy Little Elves was just a musical tone playing in the background. But they were very comparable tones or tunes, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So was that a money issue for The Simpsons, or were they just trying to be clever?
I don't know about that connection, but I do know that the song that Homer is humming in the bathroom right before, while he's shaving, which, by the way, that scene could have been written about fucking the WizKid, y'all. That is literally how it works for him. I can shave, once a week, maybe twice if I'm trying to be fucking fancy. But, that's all. That's really all I need to do. The WizKid shaves, and then, 7 seconds later, it's just, pop, and roll back.
Which, thank goodness I have the job I have now where I work nights, and I'm not working with customers at all. So I actually only have to shave once a week now. But it's because at that point, it's so stubbly and growing out that I have to shave just to feel comfortable at that point.
So the song that he's humming while shaving is the same song that the band plays, according to IMDb's trivia section.
And maybe that's where I heard it from the first time, but I'm pretty sure it was also not the main title music for the Happy Little Elves, but the music playing in the background while they were actually watching the episode. It sounded the exact same to me. But besides that, the only other note I had is the pet names that Homer and Marge call each other before they go out. Marge called Homer Precious, and Homer called Marge Dumpling. And it was just the way that they said it seemed like the showrunners, the writers, were trying to make it obvious or make it like this. Hey, look, it's a sweet married couple. But it just felt a little awkward to me. Which I guess the people that the person that James L. Brooks was arguing with said made a quip about the writing. So that was one little spot where it just did feel a little bit off. But the animation in that scene was also terrible.
Yeah, there's some obvious signs. There's actually, I didn't catch it myself, but there apparently, if you watch this episode closely enough, you can actually see like doors wiggling a little bit in the background due to how like crappy the animation was off. So something to look for. Anyway, I think that is going to do it for Some Enchanted Evening and this episode of the Best Darn Diddly Review Show.
Oakley dokley do.
I am MrMostDaysOff on Twitter. Richie, where can they find you?
On Twitter, I am at thewiz_kid23.
What else you got going on right now?
We have our own movie review show you can tune in to watch each and every week. Movies in a Half Shell.
Movie Power.
You can subscribe to Mr. Most Days Off's YouTube channel if you want to catch that each and every week. Besides that, I'll throw it back to you to do your thing.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check that out. Also, you wrestling fans, come and check me out on voicesofwrestling.com for Lucha of the Hidden Temple. My buddy Chris Novembrino and I break down each and every week of Lucha Underground. And for you Nickelodeon fans, we also go back and do Legends of the Hidden Temple's Temple Runs as a little bonus segment on every episode. So please go over there and check that out and follow us both on Twitter. Other than that, we will see you next week for Krusty Gets Busted, and we will rank all 11 episodes of Season 1. So we'll catch you next week.
Go out there and make the dope!